Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next in-depth question session with Saif here. And today we got a rather interesting one that we both received multiple times via DM or via the YouTube comment section. And we want to give you an answer to that question that is hopefully helpful and not just the usual just become a monk answer. And the question is as follows. Is it possible to reach stream entry while still entertaining thoughts of having a relationship, even a celibate relationship? Or is it simply better to question the need for a relationship in the first place, taking the strictest interpretation of the third precept? Yeah, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I quite like the phrasing in the question actually towards the end where it says questioning the need for a relationship. Um, because the focus there isn't about like following a rule, like I have to not have a relationship. Doesn't matter if I want to or not, I just have to not have a relationship. And then therefore I will get this external attainment called stream entry. It's about questioning your need. And that I think is fundamental. Like for someone who wants to become a stream enterer, as in someone who understands what it takes to be totally and utterly free from suffering. Yeah, they definitely have to question all of their needs, all of their longings, all of their attachments. Um, and also even question whether they want stream entry in the first place as well. Because even though I think abstractly every single person will look at the idea of stream entry and they will think, well, yes, of course, I want this supreme happiness. Um, if you look in your experience, someone who desires stream entry, generally speaking, is already going to have turned away from conditioned happiness in some respect. Like in the sutras, anyone who comes on the path, they always start by this like noble search. Like they see that they're subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death. Basically, they see that all temporary happinesses that I could imagine are not satisfying for me. And that turns their mind towards renunciation. A lot of people, I think, even if they want stream entry, if they look in their experience, like on a genuine level, they still value like temporary happinesses. Like whether it's, I don't know, a relationship or whether it's just having a nice family and eating nice food and just sensual pleasures in general, like on a genuine level, they still value it and they don't find anything fundamentally wrong with it. And that's okay, but it's you kind of have to be genuine with it, I guess. Because if you want to become a stream enterer, that has to be there, that certain level of dissatisfaction already. And yet that dissatisfaction is there already. It's in a sense, it's a no-brainer, right? Like, if I want the ultimate happiness, of course, the happiness that's dependent on relationships, dependent on me seeking out relationships, seeking out bonds, seeking out attachments. Of course, it's not going to be in line with my goal. But at that point, obviously, it's natural. You don't need to like do any sort of crazy thought experiments about it. It's just like, yeah, my goal is unconditioned happiness, and therefore that's not my goal. Um, on the other hand, if you do still find relationships valuable internally, you kind of have to make that internal decision about whether you want to actually put enough faith in the Buddha and put enough faith in the path that you want to actually at least go in the direction of, like the question says, questioning your needs. Or if you actually, and this is completely fine as well, you're going to be content with engaging in sensual pleasures and engaging in relationships and engaging in worldly endeavors, but you just follow the path of like a virtuous householder where you practice generosity, you practice the five precepts. Every week you'll follow the eight precepts once a day or something. You'll contemplate the Dhamma, but fundamentally you're still in that sort of mold where you still value conditioned happinesses. Maybe later on your mind will go towards increasingly more subtle joys and more renunciate joys. But for that moment, that might just be where you're at. And again, you don't have to force it beyond what's necessary because when you force it, then you end up just following rules for no reason that you don't really understand. And then You get frustrated, and the path just generates no happiness, and then you just end up falling back to a previous lifestyle again and again and again. Um, so yeah, just as a basic overview there, I think if your mind's already being going towards stream entries and is becoming dissatisfied with the whole world, I think it's fairly obvious what the direction is, but it depends where you are internally, so to speak.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I guess a person who would even ask such a question, that is already kind of a reflection of the values of such a person. Otherwise, they wouldn't really ask it. So whoever asked that question is at least on some level valuing the idea of having a relationship and having sensual pleasures to some degree at least. So it might also be a good idea to ponder a bit why you are even interested in asking such things in the first place. I think, as you mentioned, with someone who is already interested in renunciation, I'm not sure if that would even be a question that is on their mind. Um, it's just not natural, I would say. So, but overall, you would say that um, a person who is genuinely interested in stream entry will just get there anyway. And everyone else should basically just very gradually move in that direction and stop asking themselves such questions? Or what is the gist of it? Or they can pursue relationships, but from time to time at least, they should live like the arahants, like we observe the Uposatha, so that they are frequently reminded of the drawbacks of sensuality, or
It's a bit of a mixture. It depends on what the person actually wants, I think, because
I mean, in the beginning, everyone wants sensuality.
that
So,
is true. But I do think there's a difference between
mm,
someone who encounters the path and actually becomes aware of their own situation to the extent necessary, where even if their mind values sensuality, internally they have enough separation where they can
mm,
actually see that, yes, sensuality is harmful to me. I think the problem comes when people have this almost mismatch between what they intellectually desire and what their heart desires. And
mm,
so the intellectually they think, oh, I want to abandon sensuality. But actually, internally, um, not just at the level of their mind wants it, but actually they want it as well. Like they genuinely don't see a problem with it, not even at the level of like, oh, the Buddha told me it's harmful. And yet they're telling themselves that they find it harmful. And I think that mismatch causes a lot of problems when they then try to do renunciation and it doesn't work because again, internally they still evaluate. So what that person needs to do is, if they have enough faith, they have to internally actually, like you say, at the very least, like 8 precepts once a week, so the mind can actually feel that difference between the state of just being indulgent and not being indulgent. Um, and then genuinely like contemplate their situation in the same way that the people did when they engaged in noble search, like being liable to suffering, being liable to birth, aging, loss, even just being liable to just even in the best happiness, just feeling that little inch of dissatisfaction. I think that needs to be a basic starting point before you go onto the path further. Because if that starting point's not there, um, you're just going to be following rules without really understanding why you're having that internal motivation. But I think some people will genuinely, and it's maybe not talked about enough, will internally contemplate all those things, and it just doesn't move them in the same way. Like like a thing in the sutras. Like there's a lot of lay people who just they don't follow the renunciate path; they just follow the lay person's path. And if you internally do that, and you say to yourself, "Well, actually, genuinely, yes, I've contemplated all these things. In some way, I recognize that the Buddha's given me all these ideas about my future and my destination, but actually, I don't find it that bad. I find the really bad vices horrible. Always will follow the 5 precepts, but actually, the worldly endeavors, and I'm still attracted to them. And that's fine. You can then not fool yourself and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to do the stream entrance path, and just be like, okay, just going to follow. the lay followers path of the beginnings of it. Like practice some level 5 precepts, a little bit of sense restraint, once a week 8 precepts. Once you're established in that, then I think then the joy of that, the mind will naturally then start getting interested in more renunciate joys. And that's a more natural path. Um, Instead of kind of forcing yourself into just doing full 8 precepts and full renunciation when you're not internally geared towards it or motivated for it. Does that make sense?
To me, it does. So what you essentially say is that you should practice more authentically in line with what your heart desires, so to speak. As in, very much acknowledge whatever attraction, whatever clinging there still is in your experience. And then gradually move more towards renunciation, but
Yeah.
also in a very genuine fashion. As in, if you do not feel the joy of renunciation even a little bit, then that is also fine. That is something to be acknowledged. But you should genuinely work in that direction and do not fool yourself into this or that belief or this or that view.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I would very much agree with that.
I think like as well, like that idea is very useful for people who are already enmeshed in relationships and responsibilities. I think they will hear all this stuff about you need to give up relationships and everything, and then they will just be like, well, the path's not for me fundamentally because, well, they're already dedicated towards their family and stuff. Like internally, if they contemplate, okay, do I value the Dhamma or do I value my kids or whatever? Like, yeah, technically, okay, we should all be valuing the Dhamma above everything else, but genuinely, internally speaking, like most of the time, yeah, they are going to value the children's welfare, and they don't have to feel shame over that. They just have to work where they're at, and then just be like, okay, well, maybe for now, I will just focus on the path of the householder. Maybe I'm not going to fully renounce and give up my children and go become a monk, but actually, from within that perspective, once we follow the 8 precepts, and then from within that 8 precepts, I can then contemplate my situation. That yeah, actually, even though I'm dedicated towards taking care of my children and yeah, kind of having that attachment towards them, I'll still, because I have faith in the Buddha, I will still contemplate that actually, yeah, my children are fragile and that my desire and my attachment towards them will bring me suffering. And then they can accept, okay, to some degree, like I will just accept that, yes, this is my attachment and that this will bring me suffering. And then because they're not forcing themselves in advance to be like, I need to abandon everything. This is a more genuine acknowledgement of, okay, I have this attachment. I'm now becoming increasingly aware of the drawbacks of that attachment, and I can negotiate an increasingly more subtle position in regards to it, rather than just forcing it all away. Um, and then even from within that lay lifestyle, they can start purifying it quite a lot, like just by following the 5 precepts, the abandoning idle talk, being more careful about your speech, not being as angry or acting out of ill will towards your partner. That's already a lot of purification. Add on to that you're contemplating your situation, your liability to suffering on account of your attachment, and even while you're still within the household lifestyle, like that's already going to be lessening your attachment. Um, And compare that to someone who is in that situation, but think, oh, I need to get to stream entry, I need to abandon everything. And then they just get riled up over their whole lifestyle and then they never do anything with it. They just abandon the whole path because they think it's not for them. But yeah, I think it comes back to what we always say is in terms of practicing gradually, so to speak, in where you are.
Well, and a lot of self-honesty, it seems. It kind of boils down to that. You kind of have to truthfully and honestly acknowledge your situation. When you say that a person has to contemplate the drawbacks, for example, of having children, and that they will inevitably bring suffering, most people think of that in a very distant thing, as in my children might die in the future. Or, I don't know, when someone bullies my child, then I will suffer.
Mm.
To me, that sounds like a very distant way of contemplating such things. And I think it's easy to go wrong in that direction. I mean, it's of course it's true that you will suffer in the future because of your children, but it kind of takes away a good bit of the motivation to practice right here and now and see what kind of suffering having children brings in the very moment. What would you say to such a person when it comes to the suffering of a relationship with your children, with your partner? Because it should be quite immediate, I would say.
Let me think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the way I would contemplate it is not too dissimilar to the way you mentioned it, but I think the focus is slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same with all of sensuality, really, because when you engage in sensuality, you could think that that pleasure is good while it lasts, and then in the future it will end. And that normally doesn't really work because your mind is still looking at the pleasure then and is valuing that, even if you can think abstractly, yeah, it's going to end in like 5 minutes or a month or a year. But I do think if you contemplate that it is liable to end, as in it could end at any moment, that thing that you're attached to, that reveals a sort of agitation that's felt like right now.
Mm-hmm.
So if I think about the fact that like my children could die at any moment, um, like when I'm taking them to school in the morning, they could just run onto the street and then a car comes and hits them. And I think concretely, okay, how would I actually feel about that? Okay, how will my life change? I think even though you're thinking about some sort of future scenario, in the moment, you feel a sort of sense of agitation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you need to focus on then is instead of keeping thinking about those external scenarios, you then need to latch on to the agitation that's felt right now, because the agitation is actually felt all the time. It's the agitation of trying to hold something in place right now as I'm speaking that's fundamentally not able to be held in place, which is your children. They're liable to end. So a relationship from this perspective or any attachment is just basically you being agitated about things that are not in your control. Like literally, there's like a flowing river, and you're a person that's trying to grab a bit of that river and keep it held in place. And obviously, it's just going to run through your hands. And it's not about like in the future, it's going to run through my hands. No, right now, the very act of trying to grab onto that water is agitating in itself. Um, and that's basically what the act of holding on to a relationship and holding on to a children's like. It's agitating right here and now. You're basically distracting yourself from your own happiness um, through trying to basically grab some meager enjoyment from all these external things. Um, so that's kind of how I would contemplate it, but I'm not sure if I've fully grasped what you mean by that distance.
Mm-hmm. No, I meant that. In essence, that the suffering of any kind of attachment is kind of felt should be felt here. Otherwise, it's too abstract, I think. And even when you contemplate in terms of having to lose loved ones or anything like that, I think for the vast majority of people, that kind of contemplation has nowhere to land. Really, it will not has this kind of existential dread surface for them that should or could be the result of the actual experience. So I think in many cases you need quite a bit of training already for, for such things to even arise in the first place. Otherwise, it will remain abstract. I talked with quite a number of practitioners, and for them, it never works, so to speak. that it brings forth such feelings, really. And I think at least it should be felt when you contemplate like that. Otherwise, it will not change your behavior or your values. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. Then there's two things there, I guess. There's one of them is that do this on the basis of developing 5 precepts as a minimum, and then the 8 precepts once a week, because that will give you um, quite a real withdrawal from distractions, which essentially keep you distracted from the nature of things. Because yeah, once when your mind's really occupied all the time, if you live in a busy household with children and you've got many duties, like your mind drifts into that mode of just, mundane activities, and it kind of loses awareness of the higher nature of things, so to speak, such as birth, aging, sickness, and death. So I think a certain level of withdrawal is necessary. I also think there's multiple ways to go at it as well, I think, because we normally think about it in terms of like losing your children and this quite mega crazy events. But the basic principle of all these contemplations is just understanding that temporary happinesses are not very satisfying. So it doesn't need to be like, oh, children will die at some point and that'll make me unhappy. It could just be like even in the midst of happiness that you genuinely feel with your current life, like you're healthy, you're with your family and friends, um, engage in your hobbies, you've got a good job or whatever. There's still a weird, subtle sense that it's not fully right. Like I'm still not fully, entirely happy. There's still some sort of gap, so to speak. And it's quite different from contemplating this massive thing where it's like, oh, I'm supposed to get this massive feelings of anxiety. It's not like that. It's just literally like there's such a level of dissatisfaction. And actually, if you keep that in mind, that is actually there, it will start to subtly infect what you do. Like you will be engaging in your normal activities, and they'll just be like, in the back of your mind, actually, like I'm doing all these things. It's giving me some sort of happiness, quite sometimes quite a healthy, long-lasting, wholesome happiness, but it's still not enough. And that often can be enough to then push your mind towards, okay, I need to figure out something a bit deeper. Right. That's why, like, even for someone that's like quite unrestrained, I think, um, if they have that in mind, like they might read like just philosophy from unrestrained mind. And so many philosophers talk about the same thing, whether you Plato or whether it's Spinoza, they will always keep saying about the poverty of normal goods and normal pleasures and all that sort of stuff. And I think there is something that can be sparked there, even in the midst of unrestrained life. Obviously, if you're restrained, it's going to make you much better. Um, but it doesn't have to be this massive anxiousness over loss. It can be something a bit more subtle. It can just be spawned from this idea that I need to take care of myself to a higher degree. Um, that's it, yeah.
Mhm. I guess both of the overarching themes of those contemplations have in common that they kind of get to the core of things. And they very vividly show you the limits of, for example, sensual engagement. Death of a child, as an example, would be a rather extreme one, but the gist of the other scenario that you have presented is just the same. And that everything that you might do, whatever sensual experience you might have, is still undermined by this subtle need for more, by craving, essentially. So yes, I would see how both of those contemplations would lead you to the very same goal. But someone engaging in a lay life, as an example, just on a very day-to-day level, how could they find an entry point to such a practice so that it starts sticking more? Because the Dhamma can be a very slippery thing at first, at least. The mind does not really want to engage in those kinds of contemplations because at some level they are uncomfortable because they reveal this level of non-control. Like you want to grab water and it will run through your hands. That is a very uncomfortable thought. How does one find an entry point, even in a relationship? Let's say someone acknowledges that they value those things, but how to find this entry point?
You mean entry point into contemplating your
Yes,
livelihood?
absolutely. Like how to start that, because I think at least to many people that can feel overwhelming. They can't really start immediately with contemplating losing loved ones, because it will not work. And the subtle sense of dissatisfaction, I also think that it requires quite a bit of prior training to even recognize it. I mean, there is a subtle dissatisfaction ever present, but it's usually well hidden. I mean, you hide it actively. How do you get going on this?
I mean, I think this goes back to what we were saying before, is that it's weird how this works. I don't really understand it myself, to be honest. But there are some people who, even from unrestrained perspective, they will hear all these things about loss and so on, and their mind will immediately be geared towards, okay, the unrestrained path is the one for me. And like you say, some people will contemplate it and they feel nothing from it. Um, but I think that's where what we mentioned earlier kind of comes into play, where they might just not force it. Um, because sometimes you can't. And perhaps it's just about following the beginnings of the path and things that you actually know to be um, pleasurable and which avoid harm, like the five precepts, like abandoning coarse vices. I think once that's been established and like as simultaneously while you're doing that, you can make it a project where you will also keep going back to that idea that's talked about in the sutta, that's talked about in all philosophers, that temporary happinesses are unpleasant and not very satisfying. Or just even if you're not thinking about in those terms, just looking at your experience and be like, am I satisfied? And just questioning the meaning of that and what the threshold would be for satisfaction. Um, I think by not forcing it and by just focusing on what you do know to be harmful and which leads to then abandoning those leads to joy, you practice that and then increasingly contemplate those things, it will have more of a basis because you're actually, through your restraint, you're revealing to yourself the prior agitation you're engaging in and the withdrawal of that being joyful. And then you realize that direction is just singular. And yeah, the contemplation of that would hopefully bear more fruit. Maybe more sideways recommendation as well. I think maybe for some people, reading philosophy might actually be helpful. Because I think suttas sometimes the language in there might not be appealing to them immediately.
Mm.
Because they're normally geared more towards people who've already recognized like this entire truth of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Sometimes reading certain philosophers will talk about it from a using a different language and a different perspective that will hit a bit more. Um, but mainly, like I would say, ancient philosophy, not very much modern philosophy stuff. But yeah,
Mm.
that's about all I got on my mind right now.
Yeah, okay. Maybe we can come back to the gist of the question that the person asked, since we still have like 10 minutes left. So, in summary, given all that you have said as an example, is it possible for a person to reach stream entry? Because we kind of avoided that part so far.
Mm.
Given that they have even a celibate relationship where they are actively questioning the happiness that they might attain from it. Is that possible?
No, definitely not. Um, but again, don't take my word for it. Translate these terms, and then you'll see that for yourself, basically. Like I said before, stream entry, it's not a magical attainment. It's literally just someone who understands for themselves what leads to the ultimate happiness. And I think anyone who understands that, they will start to realize the opposite of that, the not ultimate happiness, the temporary happiness, is unstable. It's not very satisfying. Um, and therefore, in order to reach the ultimate happiness, I must clearly abandon all passion for those pursuits. But again, don't take that as a rule.
Mhm.
Do what it says in the question, actually question internally your need for it. And if it's too abstract for you, start questioning your need for the most coarse pursuits first, in terms of precepts in terms of coarse vices, and then slowly purify yourself from there. And I think to everyone it will become apparent because yeah, like all the joy from a relationship, it's just pleasant feeling at the end of the day, and all pleasant feeling is unstable. It's not your own. Um, it's not very satisfying. I think even from a mundane perspective, you can see how a relationship is. It's got quite a lot of highs and lows often. So someone who's trying to reach equanimity or a more stable happiness um, would probably do well to sort of try to avoid the intentions that lead me towards wanting a relationship and all that stuff. Um, so yeah, I would say that's a categorical no to entertaining relationships and becoming a experimenter. But yeah, you have to see that for yourself.
Yeah, interesting. I would actually agree that I think at least for when it comes to the seeking of a new relationship, that's absolutely you a person with an interest in the Dhamma that's not really compatible with Dhamma practice because it moves in the entirely different direction, in the opposite direction even. But when it comes to maintaining a relationship, I would say that a good number of practitioners would be in the situation that they already have one, they have children, maybe a wife. Would it be possible for them?
Yes, but without abandoning, sorry, only by abandoning, again, your passion for the relationship while you're internally in it. Um, so if you're anxiously contemplating, how can I maintain this relationship and make sure I'm in it forever, and also be a stream mentor, then no. But there is conceivably such a situation where someone can be in a relationship while they're in that relationship, they abandon that passion towards it gradually and by contemplation and so on. So that while they're in that relationship, while they're still maintaining the relationship with their wife and with their children to a certain extent, internally they're dispassionate towards it, which means that actually if that relationship ceased, or if anything ceased within that scenario, they will not be affected by it. Um, that scenario could be quite possible. But then at the same time, you can't predict it in advance. And trying to predict it is going to be your craving. All right. So if you want to become a stream mentor while you're in a relationship, all you can do fundamentally is just focus on giving up craving, giving up all passion towards that relationship. And whether you're then going to keep stay in it because of whatever reason, practical reason, because you're used to it, or whether you're going to just physically remove yourself, you can't predict in advance. If you're trying to predict it, if you're trying to, that's your craving. That's you being attached and being like, I need to have this situation. That's you trying to grab that water agitatingly, even though it's stream and it's going to go through your hands. Um, so that's what you can't do. But conceivably, yes. And I think, like we were saying before, um, if you're in the relationship already and you've got a lot of responsibilities, then start off slow. Just don't think too hard about I need to abandon everything when you haven't focused on all the prior purification that you can do while in a relationship. Um, yeah.
Yeah, actually, that sounds good. I completely agree. I think to some practitioners it will sound like good news because they tend to become quite agitated because they immediately think, oh, I have to immediately abandon all my relationships, otherwise I cannot conceivably practice a Dhamma. That's quite a common attitude among, especially dedicated, let's say dedicated hillside hermitage style practitioners. Yeah. Um, to them, I think this sheds a bit of it gives a bit of perspective when it comes to the practice as a layperson. Yeah. Anyway, any last thoughts? I think we have a few minutes left. I don't have a timer, sadly.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, perfect. Then yeah, I hope that helps people who have been troubled by such a question. Um, yeah, I also don't think I have anything to add. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for listening. If you want a bit more insight and want to discuss the Dhamma a bit more, feel free to join the Dhamma Hub Discord server. There are lots of people who can very likely help you and relate to your situation. But apart from that, I wish you a pleasant day and maybe until next time. Bye.